there are things you are doing in your business that you should not be doing. You can call it your zone of genius. Another way I've heard it expressed is that we should be doing the $1,000 an hour or $10,000 an hour kind of work, not the $10 an hour kind of work. The idea is we should be working on the stuff that only we can be doing, and we should outsource everything else as much as possible.
Welcome to the Online Genius Podcast, where host and renegade-thinking beer-brewing lawyer turned online entrepreneur Bobby Klinck proves that building and protecting your online genius doesn't have to be rocket science. Bobby and his expert guests break down online marketing and the legal stuff so you can stop sweating the small stuff and get back to building your amazing business. Now, here's your host, Bobby Klinck.
Hey there. Welcome to episode 50 of the Online Genius Podcast. I am your host, Bobby Klinck, and I am excited for today's show. Episode 50. Now, this week, we're going to be taking a break from the getting started theme for me to share a little bit about what I've learned since starting my podcast almost a year ago. Yeah, I'm not at 100 or 1,000 yet, but these round numbers are always a good time to reflect. So I wanted to make sure I did that and gave you a little bit of insight of what I've learned by doing the podcast and explain how I think it relates not just to a podcast, but also to broader concepts of being in business. So that's what we have planned for today. But before we dive in, this week's episode, as always, is brought to you by the Online Genius podcast community on Facebook. Again, this is where we can go deeper. This is where I can kind of interact with you about what we're talking about on the podcast, about legal issues, about, the beer I'm drinking, about online marketing issues, all of those things. So lots of good stuff in there, lots of chances to get more information and more interaction with me. And you can join for free by heading over to youronlinegenius.com/community. Again, youronlinegenius.com/community. You'll go to the Facebook group. Just make sure when you ask to join, you answer the questions, because if you don't, I won't let you in. That's the only requirement. You got to answer my questions, and don't worry, they're not bad. I just want to have something to make sure that folks, it's not robots and that they're actually going to give me a little bit of information. Now, I started my podcasting journey almost 2 years ago now, when I started appearing as guests on other people's shows. Now, I think I've told this story on the show before, but if I haven't, it came by talking with a coach who basically suggested that she could see me doing that and that would be a valuable thing for me to do, to appear on other people's shows. And so I did. And as I tend to do, I jumped in head first. I mean, I went all in, and I hired a company to help me do it. And I was, appearing on a ton of shows right up front. And as I did, my friends, my colleagues, my coach, everybody started saying, wow, you are really good. You should maybe have your own podcast. But then also the hosts kept telling me that too. They would explain to me, thought I'd done well, that I had a voice for it, that I seemed like a natural, but also they were telling me about all the benefits of having my own show. Again, me being the guy that I am, I talked to my coach about it, and she said, yeah, I could definitely see you doing that. We spitballed ideas, we came up with things. And that then is how I decided to go ahead and launch my course. Now, today, we're going to be talking about the lessons I've learned in that time, focusing on my podcast, not appearing on other people's podcasts, because I think it's a good microcosm. And like I said, while these are lessons about the podcast, I think they actually apply more broadly to business, and I'm going to explain how they do. And so with that in mind, I guess we aren't exactly taking a break from the getting started theme after all, because I'm going to kind of share lessons I've learned about getting started through talking about my podcast and what it's done. So the first lesson that I want to share with you is you need to do your research and make sure that you know what you're doing. Now, before I dove into my podcast, I took free courses offered by John Lee Dumas over at EO Fire. I took Pat Flynn has a free course, but I also signed up for Pat Flynn's paid course. I don't remember. I think it's called Power Up Podcasting. So I went through that and I got a lot of information that way. And I did a lot of homework and I started thinking about this. Honestly, I had started thinking about this, I don't even remember when, but a long time before. I'd looked into it, I'd thought about it, and so I went through these things. And I just said, I'm going to really think about it, and I'm going to be very intentional about what I'm doing. The idea behind that is that there are a lot of pieces to creating a podcast, just like anything else in your business that you have to think about. You have to think about things like, what's the topic going to be? What's the hook going to be? What's going to make me different and stand out? What's going to, how am I going to market it? Am I going to be guests or solo? And how am I going to do all of those different pieces? And all of those are decisions you have to make. Not to mention the technical side. Now, the technical side didn't scare me, but I knew I needed to figure it out, right? So I needed to figure out, okay, well, what kind of mic do I get? How do I do that? What software do I use to record my solo episodes? What software do I use to record interviews? How am I going to go about doing all of this? And then there's the issue of figuring out the editing piece. Am I going to do that myself? Am I going to go with someone else? I'm not quite sure how we're going to do it. So I knew that there was a lot of things I needed to do. I mean, I think I had, taken JLD's free course and maybe even gotten a book I think he had about it at some point. And so I had learned a lot and knew I needed to actually dive in. And that's why I did the paid course. And this is something, there's a broader lesson or a lesson for your broader business here, which is that you are going to need to learn. There are a lot of things that we have to do as entrepreneurs on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a quarterly basis, on an annual basis. And it's pretty hard to do them all if we don't actually take the time to learn and to keep learning. And so you need to be open to learning generally. And, when there's something that you don't necessarily know and is not in your wheelhouse, nowadays, there are going to be options for you to go figure it out. There's going to be free options to get started. There's going to be paid courses, paid resources, etc., to help you get all of these things in place. So I highly recommend that as something you definitely should do, is make sure before you leap into anything that you take the time to learn. And when you do that, you'll be in better shape. Now, the second lesson I've learned here, and this may seem a bit counterintuitive, but the second lesson I've learned is I would never try to do this without help. I would never try to create a podcast from scratch, every piece of it all by myself. Now, I'll tell you, I hired Ben Kruger and his team over at Cashflow Podcasting to help me. I got them to help me set up my show. Yeah, that's right. Even though I had taken Pat Flynn's course and he walked through a lot of the steps, I decided that I was going to hire someone to help me with the process. The way it worked with Cashflow is I had a coach who kind of helped me go through the process to think through, to come up with my original idea for kind of an outline, and then also, what the hook was going to be, and creating all of the different things. Like you're going to have to create a description in iTunes, and you're going to have to upload that, and you're going to have to do all of these different pieces. And this is just to set the show up. Forget actually creating the show. Forget actually doing it on a weekly basis. This was just to get the show from idea in my mind to, hey, we actually have something and we can move forward here. And so I worked with them on that, and they helped me get all the setup done. They helped me with all of my graphics and all of those pieces just because I knew that I needed to do it. But they still actually edit my show. So every week I get the show, and sometimes I batch sometimes. And when I'm able to batch, I put multiple shows up there. And then Ben and his team actually go through, they edit it, they cut together all of the different pieces. So, they have the files for my intro, for my outro. Speaking of which, you may have noticed last week we debuted a new intro and outro. But they put that in, they pull out the quote to put up front. They do all of that work from a raw file I give them. And they also create the show notes. I go through sometimes and make sure that it all looks good, but they're the ones who are doing that work for me. So I'll tell you, look, if I were trying to do this myself and did not have that team behind me, I would have quit by now because there's just too much that has to be done. What I have to do, because the way I have set it up, I have to create the podcast content each week. Whether it's a solo episode, I just get on here and record, or if it's an interview, I've got to get the interview done, and then whatever's added if I have solo parts other than the interview. I get that stuff done, I get that to them, and they do the rest. They then upload it, they get it set up to go out live. I don't have to mess with it. And I'll just tell you, this is something that I'm focusing on now, and I'm going to be focusing on more and more as we move into 2019 and beyond, is we need to be spending our time in our zone of genius. And what that means is we need to be spending our time doing what we are uniquely able to do, because there are so many things we could be doing, right? And we get so used to bootstrapping at the early stages. One of the good things I've learned is that if I start from the very beginning with a new initiative, with a new idea, with a new whatever it is, getting help, I have no problem outsourcing. So again, the podcast, because I was working with Ben and his team from the outset, it's just natural to me that that's how it works. I don't want to go look over their shoulder. I don't want to get into all of these things. I want to give them the product or give them the kind of internal content, and then they make the product from it. And that's it. It's the same. I now have a Pinterest team that's doing that. Quite honestly, before I started working with the team, I had no idea how to use Pinterest. I signed up for a course, but again, I started taking it. I was like, wow, this assumes I actually know what Pinterest is. And at the time, I really didn't know. So I started working with someone who was managing my Pinterest. And again, I'll just be honest with you. I give them directive. I look over it every once in a while, but I trust them to do these things because there's no reason for me, Bobby Klinck, to be in there on a daily basis creating a pins. No, we need to set the strategy, figure out what is the content, what are the different boards I want, what are the different themes I want to be setting. And once that's done, the actual work of doing the pinning, that's not work I should be doing. And so again, that's one I've had no trouble outsourcing. But I know that in other parts of my business, I have trouble, and I'm trying to let go. I've now hired someone who's working on my website, who's creating a new website for me. I'm not trying to do that myself anymore. I have tinkered with Facebook ads, but I've got an assistant who's working on that piece, getting up to speed on those issues because I've got access to 3 different Facebook advertising courses that I've taken over my lifetime. And my assistant's working through those to, outsource or, kind of to let my assistant work on that instead of me, because it just doesn't make sense for me to be spending my time doing that. So I'm working on it, and I'm hoping you are too. And again, this isn't just about the podcast. There are things you are doing in your business that you should not be doing. You can call it your zone of genius. Another way I've heard it expressed is that we should be doing the $1,000 an hour or $10,000 an hour kind of work, not the $10 an hour kind of work. The idea is we should be working on the stuff that only we can be doing. And we should outsource everything else to as much as possible. Now, again, when you're bootstrapping at the beginning, you can't do that on a lot of stuff. But the more you can, the more you're going to succeed. And again, I'll tell you, if I had not outsourced this stuff with the podcast, I know unequivocally I wouldn't still be doing it because I wouldn't have time. I would have too many other things that would be keeping me busy and preventing me from spending my time doing this. And I love it. And so I'm glad that I made that decision, and I'm going to be expanding it into other parts of my business as well. So that's the second lesson. We need to get help. Now, the third lesson I've learned is when you create a podcast, you are going to have to pivot. Now, what I'll tell you is a lot of people listened to my early episodes and were blown away with the quality. And they said, I can't believe this is, your first episode or whatever. They just couldn't believe it. And I attributed that to my career for a long time was being kind of a trial lawyer. So I had to talk to people. I had to interview people. I as a lawyer, did what's called a deposition, where I often was just asking questions, trying to figure stuff out from a witness. And so because of that, I naturally can interview people. That's just something I can do. But at the same time, if I go back and listen to my early shows, it's kind of funny where I look at where I am now. Not the quality, not any of those things, but some other changes I've made. So, when I launched, I intentionally didn't include my name in the show. And I intentionally, we made the decision not to include a picture of me on cover art or anything like that. Because, again, when I was working with my coach, et cetera, one of the things we talked about was kind of thought, hey, this isn't about me. I thought no one would want to focus on me. My idea for the show initially was this idea of Trojan horse marketing. If you don't know that concept, it goes back, of course, to the Trojan horse from, Grecian days. The notion here was that I would get in your earbuds by having an expert come on to talk about online marketing. And then I would add my piece with the legal lesson at the end to give you just that little piece, right? That was what I thought. I thought, hey, nobody's going to come to this for Bobby. No one's going to want to hear what I have to say. So I'm just going to have to kind of sneak it in. But I'm going to actually get you here with the experts. And I'm going to get you here by, hearing these other people talking. Well, now I look at it and I say, forget that. If you've been listening to me for the last, 9 or 10 episodes, on episode 42, you'll remember I talked about adding more cowbell to my brand. And more cowbell is basically just a way of saying more of me, more Bobby is going into my brand. My emails now have more of my personality. I'm not trying to be stiff. I'm telling stories about me. I'm being honest. I'm using poop emojis. I'm doing things like that. That's just kind of who I am. But for a long time, I thought, no, I shouldn't do that. But I'm bringing more of that to my brand more generally. And I'm also thinking about changing the name so it actually says the Online Genius Podcast with Bobby Klinck, so that the name actually, my name is included in the podcast name. And I may change the cover art to include a picture of me. Again, this is all part of my more cowbell. I am the face of my brand, so I shouldn't be ashamed of it. People actually do want to hear from me. Another way that I'm pivoting is that when I launched, I never expected to do solo episodes. Literally, I never thought I would do a single solo episode. There were a couple of reasons. One part of this was I figured no one would want to hear solo episodes about the law, like 40-minute masterclass about a legal concept. I said, who in the world? They're not going to want to hear that. No one's going to show up for that. And I also figured, hey, no one's going to want to hear me talking about the marketing stuff. Even though I love the marketing stuff and I've spent a lot of time learning it, I thought, hey, people will think of me as a legal guy. So they're not going to want to hear that. They're going to want to hear from an expert. Well, what I've found is that I was wrong on all counts as it comes to this. My solo episodes are some of my most popular. Now, my first one was where I did an honest assessment, an honest, let me tell you about my launch that I did. I don't remember when the episode aired, it probably back in May, early June. That's when, because the launch had happened in early May. And so I did this kind of retrospective and people loved it because I think in part I was being real and honest. And they were hearing about someone like them, meaning not someone talking about a multi-6-figure or 7-figure launch, because that's not what I got. But that wasn't my metric of success, right? For most of us as online entrepreneurs, hey, if we can do solid 5-figure launches, mid to high 5-figure launches, we're going to feel pretty good, right? I mean, that's a pretty good launch for most people. And so I wanted to share that and give people that content. And that, when I did that episode, was the most downloaded episode. It was definitely the most popular. People seemed to love it. And so that gave me some confidence. And then over the summer, I did a series of legal masterclasses or legal lessons kind of so I could go deeper on the issues. And people loved those too. I've had so many people comment about how they love that stuff because it actually taught them the stuff they needed to know and that they hadn't heard anyone talk about before. So that again was this aha moment that people actually did like hearing that. So from time to time, I'm doing deeper legal lessons. I've got some on the calendar that I'm going to be doing where kind of as part of these themes, sometimes I'll do a marketing and then maybe the next week I'm going to do a bigger legal lesson about them as well. So that's kind of been an aha moment. Now, another thing that I've discovered is that people actually enjoy hearing me talk about my marketing journey. I literally got an email earlier this week, I think it was actually this morning, with someone telling me how, hey, they always like the show, but they're really loving these new episodes where I'm kind of sharing more of what I'm doing, what I'm learning, what I'm thinking. And again, I think part of it is that you, my listeners, can relate to this because I am not claiming to be an expert at this stuff. I'm someone who I would say is I'm a very good amateur maybe. I mean, I'm someone who knows this stuff. I've been in the area for a while, but I don't claim to be an expert at Facebook ads, but I know it. I don't claim to be an expert on building funnels, but I've built a lot of funnels in my life. And I think part of it is because I'm not trying to sell those services, I'm able to really level with you and be honest and give you the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so, again, another part of my pivot has been that I'm doing more solo shows these days, and I'm not afraid to focus on the law. So again, those are some big pivots. And I again want to reach broader than the podcast and talk about this. There's this famous, quote or saying from Mike Tyson who said, we all have great plans until we get punched in the chin. And I think that's what building a business is going to do to you, right? You're going to have a great plan for X, whether it's a launch or your content or a course or a lead magnet or who knows, whatever else. But you're going to have these great grand plans, and those are great. And I'm all for having plans. But one of the things I've learned is you gotta be willing to change plans when it becomes obvious that's what you need to do. So I make this broader point. I'm changing my business model in the moment. Literally, as I'm recording this, I'm in the middle of about to launch the next product, which is kind of a new iteration of what I'd been doing before, but it's slightly different. And part of this is because I've been willing to listen. I haven't been too stubborn to say, no, I'm going to stick to the plan. And so you need to have a little bit of that. Be willing to pivot in your marketing, in your product, in your branding, in all of these things. Test and pivot, test and pivot. And when the evidence is showing you that the market would rather you make a slight change in what you're doing, you need to be willing to do it. So if you want to succeed, you're going to have to be willing to make those kinds of changes. Now, the fourth lesson I've learned is that in podcasting, there's no such thing as an overnight success. And I guess I'm exaggerating a bit now, right? I mean, if someone came and created a podcast and they already had an email list of 100,000 people and a huge social media following, yeah, they could probably have an overnight success. But that's not most people, right? Unless you have a massive list, a massive following, etc., you're not going to launch to a huge following. For my first few months, I can be honest with you, I'm pretty sure that most of my downloads came from my brother and my friend down the street who bought like 4 copies of my book when I first, wrote a book back in my lawyer days. And I exaggerate a bit, but I'll be honest with you, I didn't get over 500 downloads in a month. For many months. I don't remember when it was exactly, but at first it was nowhere close to that. And keep in mind, this is with like 4 episodes a month. So I was getting less than 200. I was getting less than 100, I think, downloads per episode for the first few months. And what I'll tell you is when you actually look at the stats, my show actually did pretty good because a lot of episodes don't end up ever getting 200 downloads of an episode. A lot of shows don't. And in fact, when you look at the landscape of podcasts, there are a bunch of podcasts out there with, say, 6 episodes or 10 episodes, and that's it. And they never go any further. And what I will tell you is that's kind of a microcosm. If I had been focused on how many people were actually downloading my shows up front, I probably would have quit too. And again, I'll say that I was looking. I was definitely looking at the stats, but I wasn't sitting there saying, well, if I don't get this many, I'm just going to quit. Or I didn't get down on myself. And I didn't because I knew that this was going to be a long haul. And I knew that this was my theory of, hey, this is my weekly content. This is what I'm doing every week. This is how I'm putting stuff out there. And so I always said, hey, this is a long game, not a short game. Well, what I'll tell you is with time, I've started to build momentum. And with a podcast, and this is true with other things you're going to do as well, you'll find that momentum is a big thing here. And in the podcast world, the reason why momentum is so big is that you are going to, you're going to have people who sign up this week, and when they do, they're going to go back and look at last week and the week before. So they're often not going to listen to just one episode. They're going to listen to multiple episodes. And so, as you can kind of see, that just kind of naturally starts to give you some momentum. And once they subscribe, they're going to be on your list. So every time you add a subscriber, it's going to kind of increase the number that you're going to get of downloads each week. And then also, normally, they're going to go back in the past. And that is kind of a microcosm, and it's slightly different than the typical, maybe a blog or something like that. But normally what I'll tell you is everything you do, it's going to be things like this. When you get people who start just, wanting to follow what you do, it'll start to build momentum. And that's when things will start to get good. And I'm seeing that momentum gain. I'm seeing things start to pick up. And so that is a very good sign for this podcast. Well, again, I want to talk much broader here. Again, it's not just about content. Your business and being in business is going to knock you down. It's going to smack you upside the head. And the successful entrepreneurs are the ones who keep showing up. They're not the ones who never fall down. They're the ones who get up more times than they get knocked down. That's why I said that being committed is one of the key attributes of a successful entrepreneur. Back in episode 46, I said that. So that's why I believe that. And, another broader point that I'm going to make here is that part of what I did wrong up front was that I didn't have a coherent content strategy. I was just kind of all over the place, and I wasn't having kind of a hub and spoke. As I've moved more and more towards a hub and spoke model, that has started to help. Now, we're going to talk about this more in a couple of weeks, where I'm going to be talking about creating a content strategy, so stay tuned. We're going to talk about it then, but I want you to start thinking about this, that the most successful entrepreneurs are the ones who are driving everything, and they have kind of a ecosystem that kind of everything connects and comes back to one central place, but everything kind of comes back and is related. And so that's another lesson I've learned from this. You can't just go out with your content and just be all over the place. And so we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks and how that will tend to help kind of add fuel to the fire once you start to get momentum. Now, the final lesson that I've learned from doing the podcast is that my podcast listeners are my most devoted, what do you want to call it, fans or potential customers or whatever. Now, when I get feedback from my tribe, it tends to be from my listeners. And again, based on the numbers, I can tell you that, the people who are listening to this show tend to be, a small percentage of the people on my email list. But what I'll tell you is the people who are listeners are much more likely to respond to an email I send to my list, because I'll just tell you, I can't tell exactly who's downloading the show every week, but a large number of the people who respond to an email will refer to one of my podcast episodes in the email response they send to me. So they're clearly a listener. Now, others, what I'll tell you is, people who are listeners, and I can tell the same way, tend to be more likely to talk to me on social media. They tend to be more likely to buy because I'm building a relationship. Now, this is something that is particularly true, I believe, about podcasting or doing a video show, because it gives you an instant way to connect with people, right? Someone reading a blog post from me, yes, nowadays that I've put kind of the more cowbell initiative in, if I were writing blog posts, I think people would get a sense of my personality for my podcast, but they're not going to have the same kind of connection. They don't hear my voice. You, as a listener, are hearing my voice. So if we meet in person at some point, or if we talk on the phone at some point, you're going to feel like you're talking to someone that you already know. That's not going to be true with any other kind of content other than video or audio. So that's part of the reason why I love podcasting. Another reason is, quite honestly, it's easier for me to get on here and talk rather than write a blog post every week. Even though theoretically a blog post is less work, etc., I can get on and do this, even though I have, very detailed bullet notes when I do one of these solo episodes, but still, it's much easier for me to talk this out rather than to try to put together a blog post, which I'm going to spend days trying to edit and tweak and things like that. So I give you that as a point of why I love podcasting. But again, I think the broader point here is that in your marketing efforts, in your business efforts, you are going to have concentric circles within your audience, right? At the very center are the buyers, the people who bought from you, who are kind of your devoted, they buy, depending on how many offerings you have, maybe they're the people who buy everything you put out. But other than that, I want to kind of start at the outside level, right? I mean, you're going to have kind of this least engaged group who are the maybe I grabbed a freebie from you once type of crowd. They grabbed a freebie. They've never unsubscribed from your email list, but they don't really follow you. They don't really, pay that much attention to you. What I'm going to tell you is there's some chance those people are going to wake up one day and start paying attention, but it's not very likely. One level in from that are the people who signed up for your list at some point and they're regular email openers. So they read your emails, maybe not every email, but they read them. So they kind of have a sense of who you are and what you do, but that's about it. They've never bought from you. They don't really interact with you on social, etc. Again, it's a little more likely that if you send an email that happens to kind of grab their attention, that they might actually buy from you. But, they're kind of still casual people. Then one level in from that, I would say, are the people who've engaged with you on social media. So once someone's on your list and then engaging with you in social, that tends to be a little bit more. I mean, they're a little bit closer to you. They're more attuned to you. They feel more of a relationship with you and more of a connection. So that's good, right? I mean, that gets them closer in. But the most committed people, the people who are going to be your ambassadors in the world, who are going to be people who spread the gospel of whatever you do, are the people who religiously follow your weekly content, whether it's a podcast, a blog, a video show, no matter what. If there are people, and if you can get people to be, listeners, readers, whatever it is on a weekly basis, those are the people that are ultimately going to be critical to the success of your brand. So you need to cultivate that, and you need to create reasons for people to want to be weekly, people who get your content and actually read it, listen to it, etc. on a weekly basis. So that's it. Those are the 5 lessons I've learned. Again, just a quick recap. The first lesson is you got to take the time to educate yourself, to learn things before you take a leap. That's a very important lesson. The second, get help with your podcast, but also more generally, get help with the things that you should not be spending time doing. The third thing is you are going to have to pivot. Be ready for it. Don't be afraid of it. Be willing. The fourth point is that there is no such thing as overnight success, especially as you're kind of building a following. That's going to take some time. Be willing to put in the work, show up, and then you'll start to build momentum. And once you do, hopefully you hit a tipping point. Once you hit a tipping point, it kind of goes crazy. But even if you don't, it starts to not just be linear, but kind of accelerated growth. And then the final point is that the people who you get on your to kind of consume your regular content are going to be your most devoted fans, followers, etc., that are going to actually be the key to your success. So cultivate those people. So that's it for this week's episode of the Online Genius Podcast. I love that I'm doing this. I love that I've gotten to 50 shows. I hope if you haven't yet that you'll take the time to subscribe, whether it's on iTunes or Google Play or however it is that you're getting this podcast. And, as a bonus point, if you'll take a couple of minutes to leave a review and share the episode, I would love that. That will help other people find the show. That'll help other people get this information. And again, don't forget to join the community on Facebook by heading over to youronlinegenius.com/community. That way we can connect more. We can kind of talk about these issues more deeply. And hopefully we can start to help each other in ways that maybe we didn't even think about. So I will see you back here next week for episode 51 of the Online Genius Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Online Genius Podcast. Make sure to tune in next week for more great tips, tricks, and strategies to help you build and protect your online genius.